It was a clear morning, the sunlight piercing through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. David, a young man with an adventurous spirit, had set out on a solo hike through the woods, eager for a day of exploration. The air was crisp and the birds were singing their morning song, but there was something about this place that felt different. The deeper he ventured into the forest, the more the world around him seemed to fall into a strange silence. The usual hum of nature, chirping insects and rustling leaves, seemed to fade away, replaced by an eerie calm. David had walked for hours, following a narrow path that twisted through the dense trees. His footfalls were muffled by the thick carpet of leaves beneath his boots. He was just about to turn back when something caught his eye. Among the thick bushes, partially hidden beneath vines, was a wooden box, sitting alone in the middle of the forest. It was an odd sight. It looked out of place, its weathered surface scarred by time, but still intact. The box seemed to glow faintly, as though something inside was calling out to him. Curiosity piqued, David approached the box cautiously, his heartbeat quickening. What was it doing here deep in the woods? He knelt down, carefully brushing aside the foliage that had grown over it. The box was old, its wood rough and cracked, but it was surprisingly well preserved. There were no signs of animals having disturbed it, no sign of decay at all. It almost felt like it had been placed there intentionally, as though waiting for someone to find it. David's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the box's latch. He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to open it, as though some unseen force was urging him to do so. With a deep breath, he lifted the latch, the sound of the metal catching on the wood making him shiver. The moment the box creaked open, a wave of cold air surged out, sending a chill down his spine. Inside, lying motionless on a bed of ragged cloth, was a young woman, her face pale and serene. She appeared to be unconscious, her chest rising and falling slowly, but her breathing faint. David blinked, his mind racing to process the sight in front of him. Was this some kind of prank? Or was she? The woman's lips were slightly parted, and her skin, though pale, was smooth. She didn't appear to be dead, but she certainly didn't look alive either. Her hands were folded across her chest, and her dark hair lay in tangled waves around her face. David hesitated. Was she injured? Had she been left here to die? Or was she the victim of something more sinister? His eyes scanned the woods around him, but there was nothing, just the stillness of the forest. There was no sign of anyone else nearby, no sound, nothing to suggest that the woman had been placed there by anyone. After a long moment of indecision, David gently reached into the box, his hands shaking. As his fingers touched the woman's cold skin, he was hit by a strange sensation, an overwhelming wave of energy, something both terrifying and powerful. It felt like a moment of clarity. The box, the woman, everything about this moment felt strangely significant. He knew then that his curiosity would lead him deeper into something much darker than he could have ever imagined. He took a deep breath and carefully tried to wake her. "Hey," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Are you all right?" Her eyelids fluttered, and for a split second, it seemed like she might stir. But then there was only silence. David's heart raced as he wondered whether he should just leave her there or try to carry her out of the woods. But who was she? And how had she ended up here? Just as he was about to check for a pulse, the woman's eyes suddenly shot open, wide and filled with terror. Her breath quickened, and her body jerked upright, causing David to stagger back in shock. The glow from the box seemed to intensify, bathing the woman's face in an eerie light. She gasped for air, her eyes wide with panic, and then, as quickly as it had started, she froze, staring at David, her gaze locked on his. David's blood ran cold. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. The woman's eyes were now filled with confusion and fear, but there was something else, something unnatural about her stare. "Who are you?" she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible, as if she had just woken from a long, deep sleep. The words felt like a command rather than a question, and the air around them seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. David's heart was pounding in his chest as he struggled to speak. I, I'm David. Are you okay? What's happening? Where did you come from?" Her gaze flickered over him, and for a moment David thought she might pass out again. But instead, she gripped the edge of the box and slowly climbed to her feet, her movements unnaturally smooth. "I don't remember anything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why am I here?" The woman looked around the forest, as if trying to make sense of her surroundings. But then her eyes darted back to David, a look of desperation filling her gaze. "You have to help me. They're coming." David didn't know what to make of her words. Who was coming? What did she mean? And why had she been placed in this box, in the middle of the forest all alone? The questions piled up in his mind, but there was only one thing that mattered now: getting her out of here. David's thoughts raced, but he couldn't make sense of it all. The woman's words echoed in his mind, her fear palpable as she clung to the wooden box. There was no mistaking the terror in her eyes. Something was happening, something beyond his understanding, and he was at the center of it. "Who is coming?" David asked, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the rising panic inside him. His gaze flickered nervously toward the surrounding trees. The forest, which had felt serene and calm only moments ago, now seemed heavy with an unsettling energy. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig beneath the weight of an unseen presence made David's skin crawl. The woman looked over her shoulder, her expression filled with an unspoken dread. "I don't know. They don't tell me. But I can feel them. They're always watching. They've been watching me for years." David furrowed his brow in confusion, trying to understand her words. What did she mean by "they"? Who had been watching her? Why had she been placed inside a wooden box in the first place? And why here, in the middle of this vast, desolate forest? The woman's trembling hands clutched the edge of the box tighter, as if it were the only thing grounding her. Her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths, but her body was stiff, as though still adjusting to the reality of being alive again. It was almost as if she had been in a long sleep, a deep, suspended state, and had just awakened, not by her own will, but because of something much darker. "I can't stay here, David." Her voice quivered. "I don't know how much longer I'll be able to keep it together. They're coming. You have to help me." David was torn. The fear in her voice was raw, and there was something deeply unnerving about the urgency in her tone. Yet he was also filled with an overwhelming desire to help. She seemed so lost, so desperate, but the reality of her situation was dawning on him. Whatever she was running from was far worse than he could imagine. Who was coming after her? And why was she here, in this isolated place, in the middle of the forest? He couldn't fathom it. All he could focus on was the sense of unease that had gripped him since opening the box. This wasn't normal. Nothing about this encounter made sense. "What do you need me to do?" David asked, his voice breaking through the tension. He took a cautious step toward her, reaching out as if trying to steady her. But the woman flinched, stepping back into the shadows, her eyes darting nervously around. "We need to get out of here." Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "They're closing in. We don't have much time." David's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the forest, but there was still no sign of anyone. No one else was there. The forest was still, almost too still, but the air felt different, heavy, as if something was hanging in the balance, waiting to drop. He nodded, trying to shake the fear that was threatening to choke him. "Okay, let's go." He reached out again, his hand now steady, offering her a way out of the eerie place she had been trapped in. She hesitated for a moment, then took his hand, her grip weak but determined. For a brief moment, Jacob wondered if maybe this was some sort of twisted trick. But then, as they started to walk together, the unease crept back into his mind. The woman's skin was cold, colder than it should have been for someone who had been alive for any length of time. As they moved deeper into the woods, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, muffled by the dense fog. David's heart rate spiked as he paused, listening carefully. Who else was here? The woman gripped his hand tighter, her face filled with genuine fear. "They're coming. Please hurry." David's mind raced as he led her through the trees, his eyes darting around the forest. The footsteps grew louder, closer. His grip on her hand tightened. But no matter how fast they moved, the footsteps never seemed to get any further away. Something was following them, something that was getting closer and closer with each step. His mind raced, his body screamed to run, but he couldn't. Not with her by his side. The terror that gripped her was real, and as the footsteps continued to echo in the fog, David realized that they were not alone. David's heart hammered in his chest as the sound of footsteps grew louder with each passing second. He glanced over his shoulder, trying to spot any movement in the dense fog, but the forest was dark and quiet. The trees stretched up into the sky, their twisted branches blocking out most of the sunlight. The woman beside him was breathing heavily, her grip on his hand becoming tighter, as if she was afraid to let go. "They're getting closer, aren't they?" David whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was asking her or trying to reassure himself. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned her head, her eyes darting from one shadow to another. "Yes, I feel them. They never stop. They follow me wherever I go." Her voice trembled, but she wasn't looking at David now. She was looking into the fog, as if something were just beyond the reach of her vision. David's breath hitched. He felt the pressure building in the air around them, the oppressive silence now broken only by the sound of their footfalls and the ever-growing sound of approaching steps. It was as if the fog itself was alive, alive with danger. "What are they? Who are they?" David asked, his words sharp with urgency. The woman squeezed his hand harder, her knuckles white. "They are the ones who put me in the box. They're the ones who want me back." Her voice was barely a whisper now, barely audible against the noise of the footsteps behind them. David could feel the panic rising inside of him. The footsteps were no longer distant. They were close. He could almost feel the weight of whatever was following them, closing in on their heels, tightening the noose around them. He didn't know if the woman was truly insane or if she was telling the truth, but something wasn't right. The very air felt thick with dread, a suffocating feeling of being chased, even though no one could be seen. He pulled the woman along, trying to hurry, but the more they moved, the heavier the air became, and the further the fog seemed to spread. They were lost, lost in a maze of trees and shadows, and with each step, the footsteps behind them grew louder, closer, and then they stopped. David froze in place, his heart pounding in his chest as the silence returned. The fog was thick around them now, so dense that it felt like they were walking through a tunnel of mist. "Do you hear that?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. David strained his ears, trying to listen over the roar of his pulse in his ears. At first he heard nothing. Then just as the mist seemed to grow thicker, there it was, a low, guttural growl like a deep rumble coming from within the fog. The growl sent a chill down his spine, and he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Before he could speak, the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, a grinding noise reverberating through the earth. David looked down at the forest floor. The earth was cracking, as if something beneath the surface was moving, pushing up against the dirt and the roots. The ground beneath them seemed to be shifting, pulling them down into the earth, trying to swallow them whole. "We need to go! Now!" David shouted, pulling her arm as he turned to run. His heart raced, panic setting in as the growl grew louder. Something was coming from the depths of the forest, something massive and malevolent. But as they turned to flee, a shadow in the fog shifted, its form too large to be human. It was towering, monstrous. David could barely make it out through the thick mist, but the feeling of its presence made his skin crawl. The growl grew louder, followed by a shrill screech, as though something was chasing them. Not just physically, but in a way that felt primal, like an ancient fear awakening in the dark. The woman pulled David to a stop, her voice cracking with fear. "They're here. It's them. They found me." Her breath was shallow, her eyes wide with terror. She looked up at him, desperation in her gaze. "We have to get out of here. If they catch us, it's over." David's mind raced. He had no idea what these creatures were, but he could feel their presence in the air, closing in around them like a vice. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but the dense fog and the trees seemed to be closing in, trapping them in the middle of the forest. The woman was right. They had to get out of here. But how? In that moment, a piercing scream shattered the air, a sound so raw, so filled with agony that it froze him in place. The woman's face went pale, her eyes wide with horror. "It's them! They've come for me! They won't stop until they have me!" The scream was followed by a terrifying clawing sound, something scraping against the trees and ground. drawing nearer with every passing second. David turned, grabbing the woman's arm and yanking her towards the only exit he could see, the path that led deeper into the woods. He had no plan, no time to think. His only hope was to run, to get away from whatever was pursuing them in the mist. But as the creature's growl echoed in the distance, he knew they were running out of time, and fast. David's heart hammered in his chest as he dragged the woman along, his feet stumbling over the uneven ground beneath him. The air around them felt suffocating, as if the forest itself were closing in on them. The growls in the distance had intensified, now mixed with a shuffling sound, like something large and heavy was moving through the underbrush, following them. With every step, the fog thickened, and the trees loomed over them like dark sentinels. The woman stumbled, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but David didn't dare stop. His mind raced. Who were these creatures? What were they chasing after? He didn't have time to think about it. All he could focus on was the need to get out of this haunted forest, to find a way back to safety before whatever was following them caught up. "We're not going to make it, are we?" the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hand was trembling in David's, and her fear was palpable. "They always catch us, every time." David shot a glance at her, his face filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We'll make it. I won't let them get you." But as he spoke, his words felt hollow. The sound of growling grew louder, and David knew that they weren't just being pursued by one creature anymore. It was as if the entire forest had awakened, and every shadow, every rustle, was now a threat. His pulse quickened as his eyes darted around. The fog was so thick now that he could barely see a few feet ahead. Where was the exit? The woman seemed to sense his uncertainty, her eyes darting around with the same desperation. "It's the fog. It's trapping us." Her voice was barely a whisper, and David could hear the tremor in it. "We need to find the clearing, David. It's the only place they can't follow us." David had no idea what she meant by the clearing, but he knew that he had no choice but to trust her. They had to get out of here, but the fog had become so thick that it felt like they were walking through a nightmare. Nothing felt real, and every sound was amplified, echoing in the eerie silence that surrounded them. Suddenly they came to a halt. David's eyes widened as he realized that the growling had stopped. The forest was silent, save for the sound of their breathing. David's gaze flicked around, trying to make sense of the silence. Where were they? The woman froze beside him, her body tense. "It's them. They're waiting. They know we can't escape." Her eyes flicked nervously to the trees, as if she could see the creatures lurking in the shadows. David looked around, his senses on high alert. The growling had faded into a haunting silence, but something felt wrong. Too wrong. The atmosphere had shifted. It was as if the forest itself had become a living, breathing entity, pressing in on them from all sides. Then from the shadows of the trees, a dark shape began to emerge. It was massive, its form indistinct in the fog, but its eyes, glowing red, shone through the mist like fiery coals. The creature was monstrous, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally, moving toward them with an inhuman speed. David's heart skipped a beat. The woman gasped in fear. "They're here! The Guardians!" David's breath caught in his throat. Guardians? What did she mean? Who were these creatures? The creature drew closer, and David could see more now, more shapes emerging from the mist, all with red eyes, all moving toward them. They weren't just figures in the fog. They were real, and they were closing in fast. "Run!" the woman screamed, her voice high with panic. Without thinking, David grabbed her hand and turned to flee, but the fog seemed to close in around them, trapping them in its dense grip. The creatures were everywhere now, their footsteps echoing in unison, their eyes glowing brighter as they closed the gap between them. David pushed forward, his mind racing. He had to find the clearing, the place where the woman said they could escape. The ground beneath him felt unstable, shifting with every step. The trees, once towering and immovable, now seemed to bend and sway, as though the forest was alive, moving with the creatures. The woman's hand was slipping from his grip, her body faltering as they ran. I can't keep up." Her voice broke, her words barely audible over the sound of their desperate flight. The creatures were getting closer, their growls filling the air with a terrible anticipation. David turned to face her, his eyes wide with determination. "Hold on. We're almost there." He could feel his legs aching, his chest tightening, but he didn't stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. Suddenly ahead of them, the fog began to thin. Through the mist, David could see a faint light, a soft glow cutting through the fog. It was the clearing the woman had mentioned, but it was still so far away. The creatures were closing in. He could feel their presence behind them, hot on their heels. David's heart raced as he pushed the woman forward, willing them both to make it to the light, to the safety of the clearing. The creatures let out a terrifying scream, a sound that sent chills down David's spine. They were nearly upon them, but the light in the distance was now within reach. They had to make it. The light in the distance grew brighter, guiding them through the thick fog. David's muscles burned, his lungs screamed for air, but he couldn't stop. Not now, not with the creatures so close. Every instinct told him to push harder, to make it to the clearing where the woman had said they would be safe. He could hear the growls behind them, the sound of heavy footsteps pounding through the underbrush, getting closer with every second. "Just a little further," David urged, his voice strained with panic. The woman stumbled beside him, her breath ragged and desperate. She was fading, her strength beginning to fail her, but David couldn't afford to stop. They had to get there, to the light, to the clearing. The fog seemed to close in around them once more, the oppressive weight of it pushing against their backs. But the clearing was ahead, and with one final surge of energy, David pulled the woman along, his heart pounding in his chest. As they broke free from the mist, they stumbled into the clearing, a space surrounded by tall, ancient trees, their branches hanging low. The air was still, almost sacred, as if the forest had allowed them a moment of relief. The light, now brighter than ever, illuminated the area, casting an ethereal glow over everything. But as they reached the center of the clearing, the woman collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. David knelt beside her, frantic. "Are you okay?" he asked, shaking her slightly. The woman, still trembling, nodded weakly. I think we're safe. For now." David's relief was short-lived, though, as he turned to look behind them. The fog was beginning to recede, but the creatures were still there. He could see their silhouettes in the mist, their glowing red eyes visible through the thinning fog. They had stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching them with a predatory gaze. The woman gasped as she looked over David's shoulder. "They won't come any closer. Not here." Her voice was trembling, but there was a sense of finality in it. This is their boundary. The curse keeps them at bay. David's head spun. The creatures, the fog, the chase, it was all too much for him to comprehend. But somehow he knew she was right. They were safe, for now. The creatures had stopped at the clearing's edge, unwilling or unable to cross into the sacred space. David sank to his knees beside her, breathing heavily. "What are they?" he whispered. "What do they want?" The woman's eyes were filled with sorrow, her voice barely audible. "They are the guardians of the curse, the ones who keep the spirits and the souls trapped within this forest. They can never leave. They are bound to this place, just like me." David's heart sank. He thought of the wooden box, the one she had been trapped inside, and the mystery of her existence. Who had put her there, and why? He had to know, but as he looked up, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the distance, the woman in black, the same figure he had seen in the forest earlier, was standing at the edge of the clearing. Her face was hidden beneath the veil, but her presence was undeniable. She was waiting. "She's not real, David. She's just a part of the curse," the woman whispered, her voice quivering. "She's the one who watches over the souls, the ones who are trapped here. She'll never leave." David felt a chill run down his spine. He turned back to the woman, his eyes filled with questions. But there were no answers, no explanations for the horrors they had just experienced, no clear way to understand the strange forces that had brought them together in this cursed place. And then, as if on cue, the woman's eyes glowed for a moment. She looked directly into David's eyes, and for a brief second, he saw something flicker in them, a glimmer of something far beyond human. "I was never meant to be freed. But you, David, you are the key. Her words were soft, almost sad. The curse has been broken, but it still lingers. And now it has you. David's breath caught in his throat. Before he could respond, the woman began to fade away, her form dissipating into the light, leaving only the faintest whisper of her voice in the air. You'll never be free, not from this place. David stared at the empty space where she had stood, his mind spinning with questions. The creatures, the woman, the curse, they were all tied to this forest, and now it seemed he was tied to it too. As he stood there, a cold wind began to blow through the clearing, and the fog began to gather once more. But this time, David didn't feel the same terror. Something had changed. The curse had not been fully broken. It had only been paused, and now he knew that his journey was far from over. The forest still held its secrets, and the guardians were still watching. With a deep breath, David turned toward the mist, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his path was now irrevocably tied to the mysteries of this place.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.